Good evening, everyone, and welcome. This is day two of Phytopia by Science Gallery, Bengaluru, and the workshop Sentinels of the Lake by Sumita Bhattacharya. And I'm very happy to introduce Sumita very briefly. Sumita Bhattacharya is a researcher at ATRI doing her PhD on water pollution and monitoring of urban lakes in Bangalore. She's interested in using bioindicators and citizen science engagement. She had studied botany from Delhi University before this and environment management from Forest Research Institute, Dehradun. You can also find Sumita on her social media at Twitter at the rate Bhatta Sumita. Before I hand over to Sumita, just wanted to set some house rules for this call. You all are on mute already, but I would request you to keep yourself on mute when you're not speaking. I would also like to tell you how we'll run this session. Sumita will first take you through a presentation explaining the context of the experiment that we are going to undertake together. And after that, about 15 minutes of time to set up the experiment where you can follow Sumita. And in case at that point you have any questions, we would request you to place your questions in the chat box and wait until Sumita finishes and then ask your questions. After that, we'll try to keep it as interactive as possible. And you're requested to keep your videos on when you start doing your experiments so that Sumita can help you answer questions and get any clarifications. If you happen to share what you're doing on social media, please also use hashtags experiment with SGB and Phytopia. I will put all of this information in share on the chat box as well. And one last request, please do not go back without giving your feedback, which is very valuable for us. The link will be in the chat box. And we'll also request you to respond to a simple poll that will be active on this session. There's a polling button at the bottom. We'll activate that in a while. So without any further delay, over to Sumita. Thank you, Sumita, for joining. Welcome.
Hello, everyone. Good evening. So I'm going to quickly share my slide and then we'll start. So the first half of the presentation will be giving a context to what are the concepts behind the experiment that we will carry out in the workshop today. The second half will be explaining how the experiment was set up by me. And it will also help you understand how to go about conducting the experiment at your place. And after that, I'll request you to switch on your videos and you can start assembling the experimental setup, and that will help me understand and be able to help you better. And then while setting up the experiment and also towards the end, if you have any questions or queries, I will be happy to help. And yeah. So today's workshop will be focusing on how we can use aquatic plants to develop a better understanding of the lakes of Bangalore in terms of their health, and specifically looking at the water quality in these lakes. So starting off, as you would have come across, that 2020 has been declared by the UN as the International Year of Plant Health. And this whole workshop and the exhibition that's being carried out is a part of spreading awareness about plant health and why it is important for our well-being. So plant health is important because it helps us achieve a number of the sustainable development goals that have been set out, such as focusing on addressing zero hunger, good health, and also good environment for all. Apart from these, it also helps us achieve the goal of clean water and sanitation. So within clean water and sanitation, there's a goal which focuses on healthier ecosystems. So healthier ecosystem and healthy plant health are linked. So through plant health, that is by observing how the plants are growing, what are the different types of plants in your environment and surrounding, it gives us an indication of what is the health of the ecosystem in total. And by ensuring that the overall health of the ecosystem is maintained, we can make sure that the natural resources that we depend on are also maintained properly and that they are sustainably maintained. To achieve this overall management of good ecosystem health, we require more local participation. This is where you guys come in. By collaborating with you guys, by making sure that you understand some very simple concepts of how to manage the environment around you and how to monitor it, we can make a better future by engaging and by sharing information. So academia and research, we can do a lot of intricate things, a lot of technical things, but you guys help us in getting an overall larger picture of how things work. And if we work together, we can collaborate and work in such a way that we can achieve larger targets, like ensuring better water quality in our surface water bodies. This is important because, as we know, Bangalore does suffer from water shortage, and if we work in a collaborative manner, then we can definitely achieve this. Speaking of surface water, our interaction with surface water and surface water bodies is diverse, especially during the monsoons. We interact them through potholes. Also in Bangalore, there have been a push for reviving all the open wells so that it ensures water security. But primarily in Bangalore, our interaction with lakes happens to be through, our interaction with surface water body happens primarily through the many lakes which are spread across the city. So speaking of Bangalore's lakes, what are the pictures that come to our mind when we speak of lakes in Bangalore? So could it be something like this that you're familiar with? Or maybe this is a more familiar sight for you. Some of us might have even come across lakes such as this, where you see very little water in them. And finally, we all have come across news reports which speak of lakes which are getting filled with black water, and it seems like they're almost dying. So why is it that the lakes of Bangalore are so diverse in their conditions, especially in water quality? And what's causing this change from bad to worse? Primarily, it's because of pollution. And the thing that tends to happen with these lakes is that we tend to ignore the status of pollution in these lakes until the point when it becomes so bad that we cannot ignore it anymore. It becomes a visible problem. However, and we tend to then forget after a certain point of time when we get used to it or when some minor steps are taken to address it. However, now in present times, civic society has been demanding the government for better management of these lakes so that they're ensured clean. And this is important for the urban lakes of Bangalore because these lakes will constantly be under stress from pollution due to the ever-changing landscape around them and the urbanization activities that keep going on. So, how is it that we want to manage these lakes in Bangalore? Do we want these lakes to have pristine, clear water and be in the lap of nature without having any signs of human activities? Or maybe we want to come to a crossroad point where we have a bit of both, where the lakes are managed in such a way that they're clean and they give us an opportunity to interact with nature and they live coexistently with the urban settings around them. So to achieve this, how do we move forward? And more importantly, what are the people of Bangalore saying? So citizens in Bangalore have been very active. They have voiced how they want to manage the lake and they want it in a more inclusive manner, which incorporates various stakeholders. Activists have also lent their voice and support for this. And finally, research institutes have been working and collaborating with these groups to come up with different methods of managing these lakes better and also for coming up with solutions to address the problems at these lakes. So moving forward, how do we manage these lakes in a way that they fulfill our needs and requirements? So one important aspect of proper management is proper monitoring. So what is monitoring? So when it comes to monitoring of lakes, it essentially means that we are observing and documenting the changes which are happening at these lakes and over time collecting data. And by collecting all of this data, we can make better decisions on how we should manage these lakes. Essentially, monitoring helps us take better decisions and come up with better plans for managing the lakes. So, and it also helps us understand whether the steps that we are taking for managing these lakes are correct, that their conditions are either remaining at a place where we want them to be or improving, or it also helps us understand that whether we need to take corrective steps so that the lakes do not deteriorate any further. So coming to monitoring methods, there are various ways of monitoring the lakes and in specific the water quality. Some of this includes that you actually go to the lake and you take certain readings for certain parameters of the lake water using probes and you get some immediate data about the condition of the water quality in the lake. Sometimes if you want more detailed information, you take samples back to the lab and then you analyze them. While these are important, they are expensive to carry out, they require specific training to be conducted, and they require equipment, and like I said, you need a lab to carry them out. So, and also these forms of data collection or these forms of monitoring are important, but they only give us a snapshot of the condition or the water quality at that time. They don't give us much information as to how the changes are adding up over time and how it's affecting different aspects of the lake. So to get an understanding of how the lake is responding or behaving over a period of time and how different components of the lake are affected, we want to use methods and systems which engage and interact with the lake over a much longer period of time. So for this, we want to use slower systems like living biological systems such as animals and plants. Plants are a good candidate for monitoring because of two aspects. First is that they are stationary by nature, and secondly, their growth rate is much slower compared to animals. So with these two aspects, plants collect information about the surrounding in which they are found, and they help tell us a story about the conditions where they grow. They let us know how the water quality has been changing over time, whether there have been incidences of flooding or drought. And because plants are the bottom of the ecological pyramid, they essentially tell us what kind of animals will be found there, whether what kind of fishes can be sustained in the lake, what kind of birds will be sighted there. And by understanding the various types of plants growing there and how abundantly they are growing there, we can also understand what kind of ecology or what kind of environment can be sustained over a longer period of time. And plants tend to have different adaptive measures when it comes to different types of water quality. So based on the extent of pollution, you can categorize different types of aquatic plants into 4 classes. And each class has a specific preference for a type of water. So based on this category, you have submerged plants, floating leaf plants, emergent plants, and free floating plants. So all of these types are for aquatic plants. So explaining a little further on this. So submerged plants are plants which grow completely underneath the water surface. And these are found in water bodies where the water quality is almost clear, that there is very little pollution in the water. After this are floating leaf plants. These are plants which can tolerate a slight amount of pollution in the water, and in these plants, the roots and the stems tend to be underwater, under the water surface. However, the leaves and flowers and fruits in some cases are found above the surface. Next are emergent plants. These are plants which tend to grow along the edge or on the bank of the lake. They are able to tolerate slightly more amount of pollution and also tolerate incidences of like extreme rainfall or extreme drought for short periods of time. And finally, free-floating aquatic plants. These are plants which grow entirely on the surface of the water, and they are highly tolerant to high extents of pollution. And so based on these types, or some people would call it plant traits or plant functional traits, you can get a sense of what is the water quality at a lake based on what type of plants you see more frequently at a lake. So now that we have these 4 types, how is it that plants are actually used in monitoring water quality? So essentially what one would do is go to a lake and first just observe all the different types of plants which are either growing along the edge of the lake, underneath the surface, water surface, floating on the surface, or are rooted, but you can just see the leaves on the top. So essentially seeing how much of each category of plant is visible. And based on this composition that you observe at a lake, you can get a good idea about the quality of the lake. So if you see more floating plants, free-floating aquatic plants, then you know that the water quality is not supporting submerged plants, and that means it's not of a very good quality. For studying submerged plants specifically, you might have to use tools such as a rake or a grapnel to actually collect samples from the bottom. Overall, this concept of using aquatic plants for monitoring water quality for surface water bodies has been used across the globe and is being adapted in India as well. Some of these examples are given here, of which I would like you to note that the example in Ecuador is quite interesting. So what they did there is that they carried out a vast research study on 18 lake systems which are spread across the country. And what they essentially did is that they went to each of these lake systems, they collected water quality information, and they also collected data on the types of plants growing in these different lake systems. And then they compiled the two information on water quality and on plant composition and diversity, and found that certain groups of plants or certain types of plants, such as swamp morning glory, Ipomoea aquatica, tends to respond to a specific type of water quality or a specific level of pollution. And based on this, they developed an index, which is sort of like a checklist, where you can then take it to another lake which has not been a part of the study. And by looking at the plant composition, you can get a pretty good idea of what the water quality at that lake is. And you can use this to monitor the lake over time, whether the quality is remaining same, whether it's changing or not. In India, aquatic plants have been used for monitoring water quality. The focus tends to be more on the effects of heavy metal contamination in these surface water bodies and how it can be remediated through phytoremediation. Presently, there has been a gradual increase in using plants for overall water quality monitoring. So we know now that aquatic plants have been used for studying water quality for surface water bodies. So how do we move forward from here? So coming back to Bangalore now, the choice of monitoring plants that we have, or overall the choice of any monitoring tool, depends a lot on how or for what purpose we want the lakes to be. So in the past, lakes were used for multiple purposes. This would include rainwater harvesting, groundwater recharge, animal husbandry, fisheries, and for drinking water. Over time, some of these uses are no longer applicable, while new uses have been assigned to these lakes. This would include some of the older uses which continue are groundwater recharge, rainwater harvesting, irrigation, and fisheries. Some of the new uses of these lakes include, and it is important, especially for the monsoon season, is urban flood management, and also providing a common space for people to engage and interact with nature. And based on these multiple uses, you want a comprehensive set of monitoring tools which allow you to make sure that these different uses are not affected and they are sustained over a period of time. And for the future of these lakes, well, that is a discussion that we all need to engage in and come up with what are the uses that we want these lakes to be maintained for in the future. And based on those uses or requirements, we have to adapt our monitoring tools. Whichever the case may be, plants are always a good option for monitoring because they can be adapted as our needs and uses change. So coming to the main experiment, like the main interesting part and probably the reason why you guys signed up, is how we are going to use aquatic plants to study water quality. So the focus of this specific experiment that you guys will be carrying out is to look at a specific aquatic plant's response to different types of water quality. So essentially what we'll do is take a specific aquatic plant and then put it under different kinds of water which represent different kinds of water quality which the lakes experience, and see how they respond. And based on our observations and information that we gather from this experiment, we can then take it to the lakes to identify the possible water quality that we observe in the lakes. So coming to the materials, while you might have received a more extensive list of materials for the immediate experiment, these are your materials that you'll require. So one of our main materials for the experiment is fertilizer. So ideally, your fertilizer should contain nitrogen and phosphorus, and it would be good if either the ratio of N/P is mentioned or the exact concentration is mentioned. There is no preference over one to the other. The key point is that we want to use fertilizers to recreate synthetic polluted water, because a lot of the lakes in Bangalore suffer from organic pollution, which is that these lakes tend to receive either partially treated or untreated sewage along with surface runoffs, which might contain other organic material, including fertilizers. And because of the excessive loading of this organic nutrients in the water, that is nitrogen and phosphorus, it becomes so toxic that the lakes then start to die. So what we are trying to recreate in our experiment is those conditions that the lakes experience in terms of organic pollution. Optional is Epsom salt. So some manufacturers would advise you to add Epsom salt to your fertilizer mixture just to improve its overall effectiveness. If they have advised, you use it. If not, it's fine. If you haven't purchased it, that's also okay. It's not compulsory. Scissors to open the packets, spoon, very important. So we want to use the same type of spoon throughout the whole experiment. This is to ensure that the quantity that we are adding throughout the experiment for preparing our organic pollution water, organically polluted water, is to ensure that the amounts are consistent and minimum error is incorporated into your experiment. We need containers to carry out your experiment. So containers can range in number from 6 to 10. And ideally, your containers should be of the same dimensions and same volume. And like overall should be similar. That just helps in making the whole experiment consistent. Marker so that you label the different components of your experiment. And finally, a notebook and pen and camera so that you document your experiment. For the coming slides and for the experiment that I set up, I used the plant whose common name is duckweed. Scientific name is Spirodela polyrhiza. This is a very common free-floating aquatic plant that you find in various lakes across Bangalore. So the reason why I chose this plant is that it is tolerant to high levels of pollution and it's easily found. So it will be easier for us to conduct the experiment and to observe how plants respond to different types of water quality. Coming to the setup, so if you decide to use Epsom salt for your experiment, then you prepare the solution as recommended by the manufacturer. So in my case, the manufacturer recommended 1 tablespoon for 5 liters of water. And since I had a total of 7 containers in which I carried out the experiment, I distributed this solution, Epsom salt solution, in 5 of those containers. And I left 2 apart, which do not contain Epsom salt solution. This is because we need to have blanks in our experiment. So for experiments such as this, where we are trying to study how a system responds under different circumstances, like system being the plant specimen and circumstances being the different types of water quality, we want to not only compare it amongst itself, like how the plant is responding to slightly polluted water versus extremely polluted water, but we also want to compare the response of the plant to when the plant would normally grow in the environment, and also in situations where there is absolutely no pollution in the water or no nutrient in the water. So for the 2 containers on your left, they would respectively contain regular tap water and pond water from where these plants were collected. And for preparing the Epsom salt solution, I used again regular tap water. Coming to the main part, which is preparing your polluted water of different concentrations of nitrogen and phosphorus. So the recommended quantity by this manufacturer was 3/4 of a tablespoon for every 1 liter. So because we want to recreate the polluted water which is received by the lakes, we will intentionally go way above the recommended quantity and create a series of containers with different extents of fertilizer in them. So I start off with half a tablespoon of fertilizer in 1 container, and then go on adding all the way up to 2.5 spoons. So at the end, for my experimental setup, we have 7 containers with 7 different types of water. So from left to right, this includes tap water, pond water, half spoon fertilizer, 1 spoon fertilizer, 1.5 spoon fertilizer, 2 spoons fertilizer, and 2.5 spoons of fertilizer. So that is our series of water of different types. So finally, we'll be taking our duckweed and we'll be adding 5 duckweed clusters. So clusters are essentially 2 or 3 leaves which are together, and add them all to all of the containers. So each container has 5 duckweed clusters to start with, and then lastly we'll add labels so that we know which is what and there's no confusion. And that's how your experimental setup is ready. Ideally, you want to place this experimental setup in a place which is open and receives sunlight. But because because we are carrying it on in the monsoons, I would advise keeping it in a slightly shaded area which does not receive direct rain, because if it does, it will affect your experimental outcome, such as, because these are free floating plants, they can be splashed out of the container, or because if too much rainfall comes into the water, they will dilute the concentration of pollutants, and then we won't be able to compare the readings properly. And once you're done, you set this up, and because you're setting it up outdoors, water will evaporate out of these containers. So every 3-4 days, depending, you want to add a little bit of water. Tap water is fine, to make sure that the level of water in all the containers are the same. And then you note down the readings of these containers every day at a fixed time. So say if you fix 10 o'clock in the morning, it's the time when you take your readings. So please maintain that for the entire duration. So for readings, we'll note down the number of clusters. If you're using duckweed, number of clusters that you observe in the containers each day. And you'll also take photographs to see visibly how the changes are taking place. So these are some of the observations that I collected. So I started this experiment at the starting of this month. So day 1 is when you see like 5 clusters of bright green leaves in all of the containers. And as you slowly progress through, you notice that the number of clusters is increasing over time, slowly for some of the containers. B, the intensity of green in these leaves are also changing for some of the containers, especially if you look at the container for 1.5 spoon, 2 spoon, and 2.5 spoon. Over time, the leaves become much paler. And number 3, the actual color of the water is also slowly changing, especially if you notice 1/2 spoon and 1 spoon. So on day 1, they are blue in color. The intensity of blue is related to how much of fertilizer was added. And over time, they are turning green in color. So these are some observations that you can also relate to lakes. So if lakes experience slight amount of organic pollution, you will notice an increased number of plants growing in them, and you'll also see the water turning slightly green. That is an indicator of algae growing in the water. However, if you notice for 2 spoon and 2.5 spoon, while there was an initial increase in the number of clusters, over time the leaves become green. So essentially what's happening, there is so much of nitrogen and phosphorus in the water that it's becoming toxic for them. So initially the plant did try to adapt to it, but then it can't anymore. This is akin to when in certain lakes there is so much of pollution in it that the plants simply can't adapt anymore, and they start dying. For a more close look at the contrast, so day 1, you see the containers and you see the green leaves, and day 20, which is yesterday, so this photo was taken yesterday, you can see that in all the containers, the number of clusters have increased. But if you look at the last 3 containers on your right, you'll notice that the leaves have become very pale and they're almost white in color. So that's indication of that is how this plant, duckweed, responds to different types of polluted water. And finally, so I also mentioned that I counted the number of leaf clusters over the days. So this is a quick snapshot of how that data looks like. So there are 2 ways of monitoring using the information that you collect. One is looking at the color of the leaves over time, and also the other would be just counting the number of leaf clusters. So as you can see that the different types of water quality can be categorized into 2 groups. So from 1 spoon to all the way 2.5 spoon, that's like the top half of the graph. They all responded by multiplying quickly in terms of clusters, but then they have stabilized. At the same time, if you go back to the photo, you'll notice that the color in the leaves is also reducing. So those are 2 things you can use when you're going back and observing a lake. And for the lower half of the graph, that is for tap water, pond water, and half spoon container, you notice that the leaves clusters have slowly increased over time. And if you go back to the photo, you'll notice that they're still holding on to the green color. So that's how you can link it up and say, understand how the water quality is over time. Finally, this is sort of the table that I would request you to prepare for collecting your data. So you have columns for the day. So 0 day is the day that you set up the experiment, and day 1 is when you actually start collecting, observing it. And then you have column for the different types of water quality, different types of water that you'll be using. And it's not in this slide because it was becoming too small. I would also like you to add another column before the day column, which is date. So you mentioned the date also from when you start, and then you keep tracking your dates. So that way it ensures that you're not missing out on your daily observations. First of all, I would like to thank all the participants for agreeing to being a part of this workshop. I'm really happy that I could share all of this with you. I would like to thank the organizer, Science Gallery Bangalore. Thank you very much for giving me this opportunity. I would like to thank BSF for supporting me financially for my PhD work. And lastly, I would like to support A3 and UKCEH for providing technical support and assistance. Thank you, and I will be happy to help you out with your setup and any other questions that you have.
So Aditya is asking why there's a necessity to add extra NKP, and as it would change actual quality of water.
Yeah. Okay. Good question. So Aditya, the point of adding extra NPK is so that we recreate the organic pollution that is observed in the lakes of Bangalore. So organic pollution essentially means that there is excess of nitrogen and phosphorus in these lakes. So if you would see in a fertilizer packet, they recommend so much, which is considered the ideal amount. So that is not what is happening in these lakes. These lakes are getting way above what is ideally required by them or what they can assimilate within themselves. So that's why we want to sort of replicate the conditions that are in these lakes. And that is, and it would change the actual quality of the water. And that is the whole point. We want to see how these plants respond to different types of water quality. Did it help answer your question? Anand has asked, how do you think the outcome would change if we do not use Epsom salt? Honestly, I don't think so it will change much. I'm not totally worried about whether you have Epsom salt or not. I would want all of us to focus more on making sure that the quantities of fertilizer, different quantities of fertilizer that we use, that is well documented and we make sure it's consistent through and through. Okay, I think now it would be great if all of you guys would switch on your videos. And if you have your materials ready, then I can actually help you guide through setting up your experiment. Okay, Maya has asked, I was wondering what type of aquatic plant, the plant I have acquired, the plant is a money plant. Okay, money plant is not exactly an aquatic plant. It does grow very easily in water. But if that's what you have, then we can also use that and see how the plant is responding. It will be a new experiment. Like I won't know the results, so that will be interesting. Okay, Ishita has asked, what does the response of the particular plant we are using tell us about what this may mean for other vegetations? Can we conduct similar experiments for other plants as well? What about animals? Great question. So generally speaking, what you could get from this experiment is that if you're using free-floating aquatic plants, then general rule of thumb would be that if your aquatic plant is growing well for a certain type of water quality, then for all free-floating aquatic plants, they will grow in that similar fashion, that either they'll multiply very quickly or they'll spread very quickly, like that. And so if your surface aquatic plant is growing really well, then you could to some extent link it to that, okay, if my surface plant is growing really well, then the submerged plants will probably not grow as well. And the plants with floating leaves will sort of grow in a slightly better way than submerged plants. So that's how you link it. So it's like this, that submerged plants are most sensitive to water quality, and then they tend to grow in only waters which are really clean. Next then comes is free floating plants, which are slightly more tolerant to pollution. Then free floating plants is emergent plants, which tend to grow along the edge or in shallow waters. And finally are the free floating plants, which tend to be quite resilient to water pollution. So you could link it like that. If you see one extreme responding highly, then that probably means the ones behind it are not going to respond that well. And that means that the water quality is really poor if your last free floating plants are the only ones that you observe. Okay. Okay, next part of your question. Yes, we can conduct it for other plants as well. So the ideal goal would be to conduct similar experiments for a huge range of plants and see how they're responding. Or the other way of approaching is that you collect a lot of data on all the different types of plants that you observe in Bangalore's lakes, like all the aquatic plants that you observe in Bangalore's lake, and in what conditions they are growing, or in what types of water they are growing. And then you compile all of the information and you develop a matrix or a checklist where you know that, okay, if you're observing all these plants only, then you know, okay, this is the type of water quality I have. Or if you only observe floating plants, that means, okay, my water quality is not great. And yeah, for animals also, you can carry this out. Actually, there are quite a few studies on insects, water insects, and how they respond to water quality. So that could be something that you could look up. Maya has asked, Ishita, I hope I've answered all your questions. Okay, sorry. Just one second, Maya. Ishita still has a few more questions. Okay. No, I would say surface plants hoard resources. They are just better at taking it up. And that's why they're better at adapting to water which is highly polluted. I wouldn't call them hoarding resources. Okay, sorry, Ishita, I hope I answered your questions. I'm sorry if I missed out any. You can always put it back in the chat box. Okay, Maya has asked, are there any aquatic plants that have been able to adapt to the polluted water easily and have continued to grow despite pollution? Yes. Again, surface free-floating plants such as water hyacinth, duckweed, these tend to easily adapt to water which is highly polluted. However, they also have a limit, and after a certain point, even they won't grow. So, but if you were curious to know which are the most resilient plants to water pollution, two easy examples which come to my mind are water hyacinth and duckweed. Okay, yeah.
So, is there anybody who would like to show their experiment, or somebody who wants to volunteer and start?
Yeah. Actually, today I won't be able to show it because due to some plans, I had to move out to my friend's home. So I guess I'll have to do it tomorrow morning or in the noon, and then probably I can share a picture with Sumita or to the science gallery team if that works.
Yeah, that's great. You can set it up, and it would be great if you share a picture and tag both of us, Science Gallery and me. Yeah, that would be great. And if you have any questions, any doubts, just drop in a message and I'll respond as soon as my network provider sends me the message.
Yes, sure. Thanks.
Yeah.
Is there anybody else?
Yeah. Okay, Maya has mentioned, I seem to have brought the wrong type of fertilizer. I will buy the right one and send the picture on the setup. Maya, could you maybe show a picture or just quickly share your screen showing the fertilizer? I really don't want you to waste if it's not going to make a... Okay, yeah, no, sorry. That's a good fertilizer. I'm not saying no, you could probably use it for other plants, but we want a fertilizer that dissolves in water. I'm sorry if I didn't mention it before, but we want a fertilizer that dissolves in the water because, again, we are sort of trying to replicate the scenarios that the lakes experience. So the whole point of this is that once you have this understanding, you can take it back to your lake or the lake in your neighborhood or any lake of interest, and you can build off a better understanding with whatever you already learned. So what I hope to achieve from this workshop is that over the next 8 days, when we again meet on 30th, is that you get a better understanding of it, and more importantly, you understand that to carry out science, to carry out research, you don't always need a ton of stuff. You don't need a lot of training. You just need to be inquisitive. You need to read a little bit. I'm sorry, but there's no way of avoiding that. But you'll realize that there is information, there is data all around you. All you need to do is just step back, take a moment, and just take it all in. And another thing that I really hope is that through this workshop, you can spread this concept, these ideas, these techniques with your friends, your family, and then sort of come together as a collective group and sort of further engage citizen science. So that is another thing that we're really hoping to get through, that ATRI is working on. So ATRI is working on a open source citizens lake dashboard project. Hopefully it will come out in some time, maybe hopefully next year. And the approach there is that we ask citizens to gather some basic information from the lakes in their neighborhoods, and it sort of contributes to this metadata, and then we as researchers can analyze that data and then get back to groups and say that, okay, this is the trend in your lake. If these are what you want your lake to be used for, this is how you should go about approaching it. And then through over time, long-term monitoring, we can get a sense of whether the lake is improving, whether it's at its static level, or whether things are not improving as well as we hoped. So that's the hope.
I'll take a moment to ask you, Sumita, how do you prefer that the participants can reach out to you?
They can reach. Sorry,
do you, like between today and the time when we all meet again for the next session, and while they're doing their experiments, if they have questions or if they want to run past you, because I think some of them are going to start work tomorrow.
Okay, yeah, sure thing. Sorry, I'll just read this question quickly. Okay. Okay, Ishita is asking, what makes the surface plant actually more resilient as compared to other? Does the increased growth also harm the submerged plant? Okay, good question, Ishita. Just hold on to it. I'll first answer Maya's question. Sorry, Neha's question. Okay, I'll be happy to be contacted on Twitter.
Okay.
If you have some really long questions or queries, then you can contact me on my email ID.
Mm-hmm.
I'll just put it in the chat box. So this is...
The participants can send the questions to programs at Science Gallery, bengaluru.sciencegallery.
Yeah.
Already interacting with, and we will forward the questions to you.
Yeah. Okay. Yeah. That's great. Otherwise, yeah, it'll tend to get lost. So yeah. So if you want to share anything or quick questions, you can reach me out on Twitter. If you have something more you want to find out about, then you reach out to Science Gallery, and I'll be informed by them and get back to you. Okay. Coming to Ishita's question. What makes surface plants actually more resilient? So is primarily because their interaction with the polluted water is limited, that they only interact with the roots or through the roots. And the other thing is that, so for plants to grow, they essentially need three things. They need sunlight, they need carbon dioxide, and they need nutrients. And they also need oxygen, because plants do breathe. Plants do produce oxygen, but they do also breathe, so they need it as well. So for surface plants, they get the nutrients from their roots, and they get ample sunlight because they're on the surface of the water, so they're not hindered by water turbidence or colored water. And they get carbon dioxide from the air itself. So this makes them conducive to being better adaptive to water quality. And yes, extensive growth of surface plants, free floating plants, will have a negative impact on submerged plants and to some extent free floating leaf plants, and to a very slight extent emerging plants. However, one thing that I didn't mention in this presentation, but which is very important, is the most negative impact that happens due to excessive organic pollution one of the most negative impact due to excessive organic pollution is increased algal growth or eutrophication. And that's why you'll sometimes notice some lakes in Bangalore becoming absolutely like bright green. And while it might look interesting, curious, like, okay, what's happening? It's not good if your lake is going green. That means you really need, so that's actually a monitoring indicator. So if your lake is going green, it's indicating that something is off, and then you need to go back and sort of revisit it. Yeah.
So that is me sharing the detail.
Yeah.
Do we have any questions? Does anybody have any questions? Do you want to confirm your material, even if you're not starting your experiments today? Please feel free. We have 10 more minutes.
I have a question, not related to the experiments effort, but generally about lake monitoring. So we usually, the basic parameters we usually test for like water quality is nitrous, phosphate, dissolved oxygen levels, and at least these are the three I can think of. But what are the other parameters that are usually checked? Like, let's say, for example, if there is a pollution control board established in the state or in the district level, what are the kind of parameters that they usually check for on a lake or any kind of surface water body?
Okay, so for surface water body, the focus for the Central Pollution Control Board tends to be more on rivers. And for India, we actually don't have standards or criteria for lakes. So that's also something that needs to be explored, and that people, including like government officials, researchers, and citizens, have to come together and figure out. Answering specifically to your question, yes, nitrates, phosphates, and dissolved oxygen are one of the common aspects. Other things that are measured, included and not limited to, there's a whole host of lists that are measured, but some of the common ones are pH, temperature, very important, pH, temperature, conductivity, or electrical conductivity, it's mentioned in some places, total dissolved solids, total suspended solids, color, biological oxygen demand, chemical oxygen demand, fecal coliform concentrations, E. coli concentrations, ammonium. These are some of the common ones which tend to be tested.
Yeah, that list was really helpful. Thank you.
Yeah. Okay, Maya is asking, why do we need the thread, glue, and graph sheet? Okay, yeah, so this was way back when I was preparing the list of materials, and I thought it'll be cool if we could like prepare like a grid using thread to actually measure the area that the clusters are occupying. However, at least for my case, what I realized is that the duckweed seems to sort of break off in individual clusters. So it's just easier to count the number of clusters that you have. So say if you pick a plant which is like sort of just spreading out in area, like just the leaf is growing in size, then you might want to create a grid of say 1 centimeter squares using thread. So that's why you need the graph paper, that you can lay it out on your graph paper and then tape it around and then fix it onto a cardboard so that you have like a see-through grid or a see-through mesh, and then you can just count the number of grids that are getting occupied over time. So sort of that is like another way of measuring growth. One could be you measure individual clusters or leaves, if that's how your plant is growing. If it's just simply growing by area, then you measure the area. So I gave in that as a backup, but it really depends on the plants that you get. So I won't be able to mention it now. I'll have to see the plant myself, and then I'll be able to better tell you how to go forward. But anyway, start the experiment. If nothing else, just start taking photos. That itself is a good way of observing change. And if I've been able to explain the grid thing more or less, then it would be great if you can prepare the grid and also measure the area. Okay. Bangalore also has Maya is also asking, Bangalore also has a lot of man-made lakes, right? And they are being monitored as well. And what are the differences between natural lakes and tanks that we have in the city based on water pollution? Okay, to this, I would first just put out a recommendation out there that if you can, please read Dr. Harini Nagendra's book, Nature of Cities. It's a beautiful book on the history of Bangalore, and it covers all its various facets, from the tanks that have been in Bangalore over time to how the city itself came into being. So in that, there's a mention on how the lakes have come to over time. So to my understanding, most of the lakes in Bangalore are tanks. I won't say are tanks, they were tanks. So they were man-made structures created for rainwater harvesting, irrigation, fisheries, and all, and also drinking water. So that, and essentially there isn't much difference in whatever is now considered natural lakes versus the tanks. One might say, I'm not sure myself, but I have a hunch that what is considered tanks falls under the irrigation department, and they might monitor the tanks to ensure that heavy metals are not contaminating it, because tanks would eventually feed irrigation, and if they have heavy metals, they will contaminate the crop, and it's these crops that come back to the city. So it's a whole circular thing that happens. For lakes, there is not a lot of good monitoring that's happening. I'm being very honest about it, and that's why we need citizens' engagement. Research institutes can only do so much. We can do the more technical stuff, the more instrument-heavy stuff, but simple day-to-day observations and monitoring is something that we will hugely benefit. And when I say we, I mean everyone will hugely benefit if we all come together on it. Yeah, so there isn't much difference. First of all, most of the lakes in Bangalore were originally tanks, so that's an interesting discussion to have. But like whether you call them lakes now, whether you call them tanks. And in terms of pollution, water pollution, there isn't much difference, to be honest. Yeah. So yeah, that's it. Anything else that you guys want to add? You felt I missed out, or you felt I could do better?
I guess not really. It's just that we have to start out with the experiment and then read a bit more about what's really going on. But what I think would be helpful is the color changes happen, right? Like for the half spoon, it was more of a greenish color.
Yeah.
You mentioned it was specifically related to algae growth. But then why algae growth happened only for half spoon, but not for the higher concentrations as we kept moving on to the next cups? Yeah.
Here's the thing. Algae also has a tolerance to how much pollution it can take. So for the algae, half spoon quantity of nitrogen phosphorus was just like it was good for it. It was ideal. Like, okay, it's just the right amount of concentration and it can grow easily. As we kept increasing the concentration, it slowly became more and more toxic for the algae to grow, and that's why we don't see as much as of a green color coming. It's not very clear in the photos, but now, like today when I again took photos, I did notice that the other containers are slowly becoming greenish in color. So that is again another indication that how plants respond to different water qualities differently over time. So on day one, you might see the half spoon container more green than the 1 spoon, but if you say leave it for more time, like for 2 more weeks, you might come to the point when all of the containers become same colored green. So that gives you an indication that eventually some of your final responses might become similar, but if you observe them over time, is what the important information you can collect. No, Ishita, it's completely fine. It's not homework. I'm not giving you to like make you do it. But I hope that it's something that interests you and that you would engage and also share it with your family and friends and encourage them to do it as well. And I'll be really happy to see the results and like just see how people are finding. And if you feel you can improve on the experiment, that's also great. This is no hard and fast rule to it. The whole idea is to engage and learn together and improve together.
So in the interest of time, can we take a pause here, and I would request the participants to relay their questions through us. You can write to programs@bengaluru.sciencegallery.com. The link is here on share, and you can also reach out to Sumita through Twitter. Thank you so much, Sumita. Unless you have any last points to make before we end this session.
I hope I answered all of your questions. I'm also learning in this field, and there is a lot to share and a lot to discuss. And I hope I get more opportunities in the future. I hope Science Gallery Bangalore also gives me more opportunities in the future to be a part of the very important work of engaging the public in science. And yeah, and I hope I could encourage all of you to just be more curious and just go out there and learn. And I would request the organizer to share a folder which has all the research papers which were mentioned in the presentation. And I'll be happy to discuss it the next time we meet. There's no compulsion to read them, but if you were curious, you can always go through these papers and we can discuss it the next time we get together on 30th.
On 30th. Sure. So all the participants of this group should get the...
Yeah.
Yeah, we will do that. Great. Thank you all. In case you put anything up on social media, please do tag Experiment with SDG. The word experiment is central to everything that we do here. So that we cannot stress upon the importance of experiments. Yeah. Thank you. Thank you all. Thanks for joining. We'll see you again on the 30th. Please do your experiments and come back with stuff to discuss.
Thank you for organizing and thank you for hosting.